Imagine walking into a doctor's office or maybe a massive corporate HR department. You sit down, ready to discuss something fundamental about who you are and like how you experience the world.
Right, a very vulnerable position to be in.
Exactly. But before you can even finish a sentence, the person across the desk stops you and they correct the very words you use to describe your own identity.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh.
And they cite like an administrative style guide or some clinical manual to do it. They essentially tell you that their paperwork understands your reality better than you do.
It's just so dismissive.
It really is. And it makes you wonder, does a seemingly polite grammatical choice have the power to strip away your autonomy? Or, worse, your humanity?
It is a scenario that happens every single day, honestly, and it forces us to look at the invisible architecture of our society. The language institutions use to categorize us isn't just about organizing data. It acts as a gatekeeper to resources, to credibility, and really to basic dignity.
And that dynamic, the battle over who gets to define reality, is exactly what we are exploring today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We are thrilled you're here sitting at the table with us for this one.
Definitely.
Today's mission is to explore a question that sounds deceptively simple on the surface. Does the language we use to describe people actually matter? We are going to pull on that single linguistic thread and see how it unravels some profound and, frankly, unsettling revelations about human worth, the demand for productivity, and the systems that govern our lives.
To guide us through this, we are looking at a deeply layered essay by Jaime Hoerricks, PhD, that's pronounced J-A-me, by the way, and she uses she/her pronouns.
Right.
This piece was originally published in 2022 and then significantly updated in June of 2026 on her reader-supported Substack, The Outside. It's just this phenomenal synthesis of medical discourse, political philosophy, and intense personal memoir.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Okay.
Because Hoerricks doesn't start with, abstract philosophy. She anchors this entire exploration in a very specific, heated debate currently happening in the medical and advocacy communities.
Yeah, it's a big one.
It's the tension between identity-first language, which means saying autistic person, and person-first language, which means saying person with autism.
Oh.
Now, to someone not steeped in this world, that might look like a minor semantic preference. But the sources show it is anything but.
No, it is a fierce battleground over fundamental framing. To understand why, we have to look at the clinical perspective first. Historically, the medical community, including researchers like Vivanti, who are cited in the essay, heavily advocated for person-first language, saying person with autism.
Which was originally supposed to be helpful, right?
Exactly. The rationale from the clinical side was actually intended to be humanizing. The idea was to separate the individual from the pathology. You wouldn't say a cancerous person, you'd say a person with cancer.
Right, right.
So the medical model views the condition as an attachment, something a person carries or suffers from, distinct from their core human essence.
Which, on the surface, sounds logical if you are dealing with, like, a viral infection. But when you apply that logic to neurology, to the very way a human brain perceives, processes, and interacts with the world, it completely changes the implication.
It changes everything.
And this is where Hoerricks brings in the research by Monique Botha and colleagues, written as a direct rebuttal to Vivanti's stance.
What's fascinating here is how Botha dismantles that clinical justification. Botha argues that clinical language isn't just neutral terminology floating harmlessly above reality.
Right.
When the medical establishment insists on separating the autism from the person, they're implicitly framing autism as a disease that has, infected an otherwise normal person. They are suggesting there is a correct version of this person trapped underneath a tragic, detachable condition.
Wow. And Botha points out that this framing has brutal material consequences. If society views your fundamental neurotype as a detachable disease, the immediate goal of the institution becomes eradicating, fixing, or curing that disease. Botha argues this leads directly to stigmatization, dehumanization, and even violence against autistic people, because suddenly, therapies and interventions aren't about supporting the person they are, about suppressing the autistic traits to make the person appear normal.
Precisely. Botha and colleagues forcefully argue that this debate has to center on the autonomy, the needs, and the right to self-determination of autistic people themselves. The autistic community overwhelmingly prefers identity-first language, autistic person.
Because it's who they are.
Yes, you cannot separate the autism from the person without fundamentally altering who that person is. It is their lens. It's their operating system. By demanding person-first language, the medical establishment is essentially refusing to recognize the reality of the people they claim to serve.
It's entirely about power and authority. I mean, think about it this way. Imagine showing up for the first day of your life, and an institution forcefully writes your name tag and a highly clinical job description of your own existence.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. And they slap it on your chest without ever consulting you on how you view yourself, what your intrinsic traits are, or how you actually navigate the world. And from that day forward, every time you try to explain your actual lived reality, the institution just points at the name tag they wrote and says, no, our manual says you are this.
That analogy hits at the core of the issue. If an external institution is writing the name tag, they hold all the cards. They are the ones who decide if your self-reports are credible.
Yeah.
They decide if your pain is believed or if it's just a symptom to be managed. They decide what accommodations you are granted. They act as the ultimate gatekeepers to your own reality.
And this is where Hoerricks does something structurally brilliant in her essay. She looks at this localized debate over autistic person versus person with autism, and instead of staying in the clinical weeds, she zooms out.
She goes macro with it.
She really does. She questions how a dispute over linguistic terminology serves as a proxy for a much deeper societal question, but who actually deserves to belong.
To follow her logic there, we have to understand the specific analytical lens she applies to the world. Hoerricks shares some vital background in the essay. She grew up in a Marxist household, and she spent years immersed in the works of the psychoanalyst and philosopher Erich Fromm.
And those two frameworks are incredibly important for how she dissects power. The Marxist lens she grew up with, focuses heavily on how society values humans, primarily based on their labor, their output, and their relationship to capital.
Right. And then you add Erich Fromm's philosophy, which was deeply humanistic. Fromm was highly critical of modern industrial societies because he felt they turned humans into mere cogs in a vast economic machine.
Just parts on an assembly line.
Exactly. He was fiercely interested in the person before the category, the living, breathing, unquantifiable life before the bureaucratic system gets its hands on it to label and sort it.
So she has this background that is hyper-aware of how economic systems exploit labor, combined with a philosophical dedication to intrinsic human dignity. When she encounters a medical institution insisting on a specific label against the wishes of the marginalized group, her mind naturally searches for the underlying mechanism of control.
Exactly. She is wired to look past the paperwork and ask, how does this categorization impact human dignity? How does it serve the broader societal system?
I have to ask, though, just to challenge this a bit, are we maybe reading too much malice into administrative paperwork? I mean, a hospital administrator or a government clerk using person-first language probably isn't sitting in an office rubbing their hands together, plotting to strip someone of their autonomy, right?
It's a fair point.
Aren't these massive bureaucracies just trying to organize millions of data points the only way they know how?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see that Hoerricks actually agrees with that premise. She isn't claiming that every clerk or doctor is acting with conscious malice. The intent of the individual administrator might just be to standardize a database.
Okay, so it's not some grand conspiracy.
Right, but the outcome is what is profound. Bureaucracies function on efficiency. What Hoerricks realizes is that the default language a society uses to organize its data reveals its deepest unsaid assumptions. And the core assumption in our administrative language is that some people are considered the default and everyone else is expected to justify their existence and prove their worth.
Which brings us to an incredibly raw, personal story she shares to illustrate the devastating reality of having to justify your existence. Because this isn't just an abstract theory for her. I want you to picture the scenario she paints. She describes a time when she was a young adult. It's a vulnerable period.
Extremely vulnerable.
She is trying to build a life, working various temporary jobs, struggling to find any kind of steady employment, and money is extremely scarce. Because she is struggling, she is staying in a room at her grandmother's house.
It is a precarious situation. She has very little leverage. And then an elder in her life, she notes this is a male figure. Not her grandmother, comes to the house and demands rent for the room she is occupying in her grandmother's home.
And Hoerricks attempts to explain her reality to this elder. She explains that she simply does not have the money. But the elder doesn't engage with her reality. He doesn't ask about her job search or offer assistance or acknowledge her struggle. Instead, she recounts how he weaponized a specific biblical verse against her.
Yeah, the way she tells it is intense.
He quoted 2 Thessalonians 3:10, "If anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat."
The deployment of that specific quote in that moment is a devastating encapsulation of the systemic mindset she had been writing about. By invoking that phrasing, the elder instantly obliterated the context of her life.
He erased the entire distinction between being unable to work and being unwilling to work.
That is the crucial mechanism. The fact that she was actively trying to find work didn't matter. The fact that she was family didn't matter. Her individual humanity was removed from the equation. The elder applied a rigid, uncompromising rule. Human value is strictly contingent on economic productivity.
Wow.
Faced with that absolute judgment, Hoerricks ended up selling whatever meager possessions she had just to pay him.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the lesson she took from that traumatic encounter wasn't just about a harsh family dynamic. It was an epiphany about the bedrock of modern civilization. Society operates on a harsh transactional ledger.
A ledger, yeah.
Your basic right to exist, your right to take up space, your right to be sheltered and fed is entirely conditional. It is only considered valid if your personal productivity column is generating capital.
The ledger metaphor is brilliant because it exposes the cruelty of conditional worth. If your labor generates value, society grants you the right to survive. But if you cannot produce, if you are disabled or chronically ill or neurodivergent in a way that doesn't fit the traditional workplace, your claim upon the community suddenly becomes a debate. Your basic right to be supported is treated as a drain on the system rather than a fundamental human right.
Wait, if the system demands you prove your productivity to get access to resources and accommodations, but you need those accommodations in order to be productive in their system, it is a completely rigged game.
Oh, completely.
You are constantly in a deficit. You're always proving you deserve to be here.
It is exhausting, and it's an impossible standard because nobody, absolutely nobody, can remain highly productive 100% of their life. We all experience illness, we all face periods of burnout, and if we are lucky enough, we all age.
Which perfectly sets up the inevitable and somewhat haunting 2026 update to this essay, because Hoerricks notes that time has a very specific way of rearranging our certainties.
It forces a reckoning with that ledger system. Let's look at the timeline. The original essay, containing the story of the elder demanding rent, is published in 2022. The 2026 update reveals what happened next. That same elder, the man who equated a person's worth with their physical ability to labor, aged.
He fell right off his own map.
He did. His physical independence vanished. He required deep, intensive care. The man who told a young woman that she shouldn't eat if she couldn't work found himself in a position where his own needs multiplied exponentially and his ability to produce dropped to absolutely zero.
The ultimate irony.
Yeah. He became entirely dependent on the goodwill, the labor, and the unconditional care of others.
And the jarring detail Hoerricks includes is that this elder ultimately passed away just 1 week after her original 2022 essay was published.
This raises an important question. It is the profound question that echoes through Botha's medical research, from Communidism and Hoerricks' personal life. What becomes of any of us when our ability to produce can no longer be used as evidence that we deserve to remain here?
If the ledger goes into the red permanently, do you lose your humanity? Because politicians love to stand at podiums and talk about the robust safety nets we have for the vulnerable. But Hoerricks points out that rhetoric doesn't match the reality.
Not at all.
Every year, countless disabled, elderly, and marginalized people fall right through those nets because the systems designed to help them are still obsessed with making them prove their worth.
That realization prompted her 2026 reflections. Over the 4 years between the original publication and the update, Hoerricks wrote extensively about various marginalized experiences. She covered disability, gender identity, education, and clinical diagnosis. And across all those distinct fields, she identified the exact same institutional pattern.
It's the reversal of reality.
Yes, a total reversal. Institutions consistently place the category before the lived experience. They build a rigid, bureaucratic structure, and then they try to forcefully compress messy, complex, beautiful human lives to fit inside their neat little administrative boxes.
She describes it perfectly. The map becomes more important than the territory.
That concept is the key to unlocking the whole essay. An institution draws a map, a diagnostic manual, a set of economic metrics, a list of acceptable behaviors. And when a real human being, the actual territory doesn't match the map, the institution doesn't redraw the map.
They blame the territory.
Exactly. It blames the territory. The diagnosis becomes more visible to the system than the person sitting in the room.
So bringing this all the way back to our starting point, if these massive debates, whether it's the medical community fighting over identity first versus person first language, or a bureaucracy insisting on a specific gender marker, or an economic system categorizing people by their labor output. If none of this is actually about getting the grammar perfectly correct, what are these debates actually about?
Hoerricks concludes that they are fundamentally arguments about recognition and authority. Who possesses the unalienable right to name themselves, and who is forced to accept being named by a higher power?
Right.
Words are not just magical incantations. Words are the physical evidence of our deepest, most entrenched societal beliefs about dependency, vulnerability, and who qualifies as fully human.
So when a medical system insists on calling someone a person with autism, against the explicit wishes of the autistic community, they aren't just being grammatically stubborn, they are planting a flag. They are saying, we define the terrain, we draw the map, you do not.
They are maintaining the hierarchy. They are reinforcing the idea that your fundamental identity is a problem to be solved rather than a reality to be accommodated. Because if society accepts that you are simply an intrinsic whole person whose neurology is just a natural variation of the human experience, then the moral obligation shifts.
Because then society would have to adapt to support you.
Precisely. But if they can use language to frame your identity as a detachable condition or a failure to produce well, then the burden remains entirely on you to fix yourself, to hide your traits, and to bend until you fit their map.
So what does this all mean? We've traced this from the clinical language of Monique Botha's research, through the humanism of Erich Fromm, into the harsh economic realities of an elder demanding rent, all the way to the haunting realization that every single one of us will eventually lose our ability to be productive. We are left with a pretty massive intellectual challenge.
It challenges us to interrogate our own internal ledgers, the ones we apply to others and the ones we apply to ourselves.
Exactly. Think about how you process your own days when you are exhausted or sick or simply resting. Is there a creeping guilt, a quiet voice, suggesting that because you didn't produce anything tangible today, you were somehow less worthy of taking up space?
We all hear that voice sometimes.
We do. But that guilt is the ledger system working exactly as it was designed to. But Hoerricks' ultimate takeaway offers a radical, liberating alternative. Support, care, and basic human dignity should exist simply because human beings are inherently worthy. Full stop. Not because you earned it through exhausting labor, and certainly not because you perfectly matched the description on an institution's administrative map.
It is a demand for a society that values the territory over the map. A society that views human vulnerability not as a failure of productivity, but as a guaranteed shared experience that requires unconditional care.
Which leaves us with one final, lingering thought for you to carry with you after this deep dive ends. We talked at the very beginning about that incredibly detailed, comforting map, the blue rivers, the red highways. But if we were to take all of our societal maps, every clinical label, every administrative category, every single economic measure of a person's productivity, and we completely strip them away, what remains? What is the raw, unmapped, intrinsic territory of a human being that inherently commands dignity, even when they can produce absolutely nothing at all?
Navigating that raw territory is the real work of being human.
Because the map is not the mountain, and it is well past time we started looking at the mountain. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.